You're watching the news at 1. Thanks so much for staying with us. Now, the Competition Commission is investigating Rooibos Limited for monopolizing tea supply and anti-competitive behaviour. This after they've raided Karan Beef's offices, investigated grocery stores, pharmaceuticals and collusion in the sales of school uniforms, among other things. Sipho Ngwema, who's head of Department for Communications, joins me in studio. Thanks so much for your time on SABC News. One of your core functions is to investigate and prosecute this kind of behavior that you've spoken about. Take us through how you do this.
We do this in different ways. For example, if you suspect that there's price fixing, because when you look around, you think that those who supply that services may have fixed the price. So you approach us, then we do an investigation. But in some instances, we have got our own ways of finding out, because we are concerned about a market where there are distortions in terms of competition, or where there is a threat to competition, or even a lessening of competition. So we then set out and make sure that we investigate that particular sector or entity in order to discover whether or not the Competition Act has been breached.
Mm-hmm. What happens if you find out that the Competition Act has been breached?
Once we have initiated an investigation, when we discover in the end that there are reasonable grounds to charge a party, we then charge them. By charging them, then we would then put the charges before them, whether it's collusion, whether it's abuse of dominance, price fixing, any of the breaches in terms of the Act, and therefore we take them to the Competition Tribunal. In the Competition Tribunal, there's a panel which then would adjudicate the matter that we bring before them. The party that we're accusing or charging will then come with their own facts to refute whatever we have brought, or would then decide to settle with us. In the end, then we reach either a settlement or they are found guilty. Once we have reached a settlement in terms of what administrative penalty or remedy is required, of course determined by the merits or the circumstances of that particular case, and then we impose or we seek before the tribunal whatever remedy that we need, and then that is imposed if the tribunal believes that what we have asked for is proportional to the offence that has been committed.
A lot of complaints about you is that even though you do good work, you do slap on the wrists for companies who make millions of rands. Adcock Ingram, for instance, they paid a settlement of 2 million rand to the Competition Commission to avoid litigation. They make hundreds of millions.
Yes, indeed. I mean, companies, of course, make different kinds of profits depending on the sector they are in, depending on the kind of business. But what we are interested in is the offence. Remember I said earlier, the kind of penalty that we impose is determined by the offence that one has committed. So it doesn't matter whether you are rich or super rich. If we commit a particular traffic offence and the stipulation in terms of the law of that offence is 150 rand, it doesn't mean because you are wealthy you must pay 2 billion and I must pay 150. It means that offence is determined in terms of the merits, as I said, and the stipulation in the Act. But also, what I must say is that the maximum that we can charge in terms of the Act is 10% of the turnover of that particular company. So in the matter that you're talking about, it was a breach because those parties did not inform us before they concretize or finalize their merger or acquisition. In terms of the Act, they're supposed to come to us. We must look at it and decide whether or not it is a measure that we approve.
You're investigating malls, Rooibos companies, meat producers, cell phone companies, uniform suppliers. There's a sense that across the private sector in South Africa, there's anti-competitive behaviour. How do you ensure that you're not just catching the behaviour at the tail end?
What we are trying to do, of course, is to make sure that we investigate as many cases as possible. We have got our areas of focus in terms of priority areas. We have got about 7 of them. But what is important is that in the end, we want change of behavior. So parallel to very many of our investigation is an advocacy process that begins to engage. Very many of the cases that we do don't end up with punishment, don't end up before the tribunal. Matters are resolved amicably. We have recently done an investigation into automotive aftermarket, where you're dealing with cars, parts, panel beating, where they are forcing people to go to certain panel beaters or to go to certain service centers, which are expensive. But we have reached an amicable agreement as we move to say we need to change. We are now in the process of coming up with a code of conduct so that they stop forcing people to go to their own panel beaters, to go to their own mechanics and so on and so forth. So very many of the things that we do not necessarily end up in prosecution or in those kinds of remedies, but we try and make sure that behavior changes so that companies stop abusing that respective position.
Sipho Ngwema, thanks so much for your time on SABC News.